Yo, Shortbox Nation. Welcome back to the podcast for another episode. If you're new, well, you just made a pretty good choice and press and play. Welcome to the show. My name is Botter, and this is the Shortbox Podcast, the comic book talk show that brings you top-tier conversations and interviews about comic books with the people that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making them. This is episode 419. I said that like a robot. This is episode 419. And today I've got a guest who I can't wait to introduce you to because he's someone who is not only a recognized name in the comic industry, especially among the comic journalism crowd, but he's built a career that I truly admire and I've been following along for some time now. So if you're an aspiring or current comic podcaster, critic, content creator, maybe even aspiring comic letterer, etc., I think there's a lot to learn from and appreciate this episode. His name is Hassan Otsmane-Elhaou. He's a multi-award-winning comics letterer who's been employed by DC, Dark Horse, Image, Dynamite, Vault, and Dynamite Entertainment, to name a few. He's currently lettering the new Kid Cudi comic, Moon Man, as well as my favorite comic of the year so far, Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees. Hassan is also the 2 times award-winning editor of the digital comic magazine Panel by Panel. He's a voice behind the seminal YouTube channel Strip Panel Naked. And as of October of last year, he added published comic writer to his already extensive resume by releasing his debut graphic novel, The Unlikely Story of Felix and Macabre. He's on the podcast today to talk about comic lettering, comic journalism, and I might be able to get him to share the secret to unlocking a 25th hour in the day to be able to do all these great things. Without further ado, Shortbox Nation, let's welcome and give it up for Hassan Otsmane-Elhaou on the show. Hassan, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good, yeah. That's a good intro.
I appreciate it, man. Hopefully I didn't butcher the name too much.
No, it was good. It worked.
From one interesting named individual to another. Hopefully, I didn't butcher it too bad. I know the pain. How is your weekend treating you, man? We're recording on a Sunday. I told you it's not my. I used to record on Sundays a lot. It's not my normal days now. I kind of flip flop, but it's nice to kind of get back into the old routine. How's your weekend going?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm shattered, to be honest. I'm quite tired. But that's not related to this. That's more just 'cause life's long and it days are long.
I got you. Damn, my heart would have been broken if it was like, yeah, this podcast, came at a bad time.
It's just just time,
just life.
Just time, yeah, just things, just life just carries on.
Yeah,
I'll keep it light. I'll keep it light for the rest of this.
No. Let's get into existential dread and some heaviness, man. The fans get the light stuff all the time. Let's get real. But I brought some attention to the name, and I guess I should ask, where does the name come from?
It's Algeria. So I'm half Algerian, so half British, half Algerian.
Okay.
And it's I mean, there's a whole history to it of sort of, French rule and French changing the name. That is probably not that interesting to people listening, but it's an Algerian name with a slight French rework due to colonialism. It's not funny. I mean, I don't know why I'm saying that with a giggle.
No. But, that darn colonialism will do it all the time, I tell you. Does it have any special meaning? I know some folks will occasionally send me emails like, hey, I learned what your name means. It means like full moon in Arabic. You thought you could keep it a secret. I'm like, I'm not keeping it a secret. But does your name have any special meaning?
I think it means like, this is going to sound egotistical now, but I think it means, I mean, if you see the video clip of this, then you can take your own idea from that, but I'm pretty sure it means like handsome. I mean, I don't know. Like, I've got no idea.
Awesome.
I don't know.
Yeah. That is, you know what? I don't think it's enough for you, man.
That's what my mom told me. So.
I don't think it's enough, all right? Beautiful. Nah, I'm kidding. That's great. That's awesome. Handsome. Interesting. Yeah, that definitely sounds like something a mom would tell you. No, baby, it means handsome. It means the chosen one. I was waiting on that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
No one write in to clarify. I think let's leave it with that. We're all happy thinking that's what it means.
Yo, let him have this, all right, internet? Let him have this. We don't need your opinion on this. Do you mind if I call you Haas, by the way? I know that you signed, hell, you got your name Haas on this one.
Go for it. It's
Perfect,
much easier for everyone.
So, So Haas, I understand that you currently reside in the UK, right?
Hmm.
Anywhere in particular that you'd care to share?
Just all over, just the
Okay.
whole, just one big house that covers the whole land.
Damn, comic lettering pays well. Well, I was gonna ask. I always bring up location wise because I'm always curious, like what the comic scene like is in any particular area. Like if I was to make a trip to the UK and I wanted to do like comic book specific things, are there any shops or related things that I should go do or see or visit?
Well, I think the thing is that I think with like the UK is so small that
Hmm.
I remember I was in America once and I was chatting to this guy and he was like, I want to go visit England. And he's like, I want to see, I think he said, I want to see like Manchester, London, and I don't know, some other Cornwall maybe. And he was
Hmm.
like, "Do you reckon I could do all that in a week?" And I was like, "To be honest, you could probably do it in a day. It's not
Damn.
like a big. It's not like you could drive from Manchester. This is. I'm so bad with geography. I was about to make a bold statement about how many hours it would take to drive from one place to the other, but it's most places you can drive from one end of the country to the other in a day with change. With a lot of
Hmm.
time spare. It's not very big, so you could hit off all the places. There's some cool shops in London. Thought Bubble in Harrogate is like my favorite show every year. Comic convention is really good fun. That's like the big one for me. That's like my favorite comic related thing of the year in
Hmm.
England.
How often do you make your way out to comic conventions, whether that be in the States or just around Europe? I know like the convention the conventions in Europe are like, are numerous. I'm always feel like I'm always learning some new ones. Like I had Declan Shelby on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he was dropping all these names and places. I'm like, wait, there's one in Milan, there's one in here and there. It's like, damn, I need to start using my passport more. So I guess what is the how do you go about conventions? Do you do a lot of traveling?
Well, Dex, Dex big time. That's what we call him, big time Deck. And he's everywhere. He hits up all the shows. I go to one comic convention a year, and that is probably too many for me.
Hmm.
I don't know how much I enjoy comics. I get enough of it Monday through Friday. I go to Thought Bubble every year. I mean, it's Thought Bubble is like a really fun show. It's like a
Hmm.
really really cool show, and it's all about comics as well, which is always good fun.
Okay.
So that's like my one excursion out of the house a year is to go to Thought Bubble in November.
Got it. So if I wanted to get any one of my mini comic books I now own that has your name on the cover as letterer, I have to make that trip to Thought Bubble to come see you. All
Yeah,
right, I got
I
it.
don't go
Challenge
anywhere else.
accepted. All right, no, challenge accepted, good sir. What's harder, or what role do you enjoy more? Editor, writer, letterer, podcaster, video creator, or director?
They're all. I mean, the thing, it's not. They're all quite different. I just like lettering comics. I think. I mean, that's
Hmm.
probably obvious from the fact that that's like the only one of those things that I really do anymore. But I like lettering a lot. I think
Hmm.
I really missed making panel by panel. I think that will be coming back to that. I think just because that was really really good fun, and that was like a nice way to kind of like uh do something that sort of felt valuable in a way that lettering doesn't necessarily feel valuable. It's just it's like no, it doesn't feel valuable, but you know what I mean. It's like it's like a job that I enjoy doing. But like panel by
Hmm.
panel was a fun way to kind of like keep up to date with everything and work with people and give try and help people like kind of get their work seen and stuff like that. It felt kind of like quite it felt like a fun involvement in comics criticism,
Hmm.
and so I really really miss doing that. So that I want to bring that back at some point soon. So that those two things were like probably like my two favorite things um, to do. Was that the question?
Yes, yeah, actually. Well, and then what's
I-
harder then? What's harder
oh,
out
what's
of all of
harder?
those roles? Yeah.
Well, panel by panel was really like was much harder, but I mean, just because like it's hard, it was harder to give the time of day because it didn't really make a lot of money, so it's harder to
Mm-hmm.
like give the amount, and that was it took a lot of hours, and also for like Tiffany Babb who co-edited like most of that of the 70 issues with me, like it took like a lot of her hours as well. The writers gave a lot of their time. It was a big grand idea that I didn't we didn't expect it to be as involved as it ended up being. And so it kind of just took us all along for the ride for the most part. So it was really, it's like, I mean, once I counted up how many hours a month it took me, that was when I was like, it's probably time for a little bit of a break from making that. But it was good, but it's hard, but it was really, really good fun. Like that's been kind of like the most rewarding thing I think that I've sort of worked on. But just because you're working with other people, and it's not just like you're not just by yourself. It's like it felt like it was just a fun process of working with writers and kind of seeing writers get like kind of like they're finding their voice like over time was really, really interesting, and giving opportunities to people that maybe weren't getting opportunities at other places, and kind of giving them a chance to grow and develop their writing style and give them a place to get paid to write about comics as well. It just felt like that was a good thing. It felt like it was a good thing. That was very high and mighty of me to say it was a good thing, but it felt positive, I suppose. So it was hard. It was hard work, but it was kind of, I think it was worth it.
No, absolutely. Look, as a fan, I guess it's a little bias over here speaking as a fan, but hearing you say how involved it is, and how much work was put into it, the time and effort. As a fan, I could tell. I could just tell it was made with a lot of love, a lot of attention, a lot of detail. I mean, from the covers are always striking, the design wise, the editorials and the write ups are well thought out. The interviews are great. I say all that to say, if you're someone listening right now that's not familiar with Haas's work on Panel by Panel or Strip Panel Naked, and you love comic books and how they're made, and and you love the nuances, I highly recommend them. And I guess, Haas, I'll put you on the hot seat for maybe someone that isn't quite familiar with. And we'll get to the comic lettering here in a second, but just focusing on Strip Panel Naked and Panel by Panel. If you had to recommend maybe the first a video for Strip Panel Naked or an issue of Panel by Panel that you're maybe just a little more proud of, that you feel like it represents those two things the best, where would you point people towards?
I think the Strip Panel Naked episode that like has the most it like on the analytics, I think it's like used in educational settings the most. Is one about 3-act structures in newspaper strips, like Calvin and Hobbes and stuff like that. And so that's probably not. It's hard for me to say because I don't think any of them are very good once I've released them. But that was the one that is used the most.
Spoken like a true content creator.
So it's that one maybe like that's a fun. It's like the idea is kind of like looking at like how do you do a gag strip basically, like how do you do a setup kind of like build and then kind of twist punchline thing in like a newspaper comic strip. So that's quite a fun one, and it also teaches you about like the idea of like what is a tier and how do images relate to each other, blah 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 blah. So that's I think that's a fun one. For the magazine, I don't know. I think they're like the magazines. I am happy to say the magazine is good because my involvement in it in terms of like the actual writing is very, very minimal. For most of the second half of the run, I didn't even really write anything. I was just kind of editing and overseeing and putting it all together. So I'm much happy to say that that's quite good. But the magazine issue, maybe like the Mr. Miracle issue was popular, which was issue 4. And yeah, I think all of them are quite good. I think a good thing to do is like if you look through the covers. So we did 70 issues, and most of those issues have half of the issue dedicated to one specific comic. So if you look through the covers and there's like, oh, I'm a big fan of like Pretty Deadly or whatever, or I'm a big fan of Somebody's Killing the Children or something like that, then Something Killing the Children, as in the comic, not something like that.
Not literally.
But if so, have a look at the covers, and if there's like a comic you're like, I'm a fan of that comic, try that issue, and I think you'll enjoy it because it's really I think there's a lot of fun stuff in there. But the romance issue, maybe. So to then completely twist on that point and say something different, we did a romance issue in like the pandemic times when comics weren't really coming out, and there's like a really fun through line essay that kind of goes from like the history of romance comics to the modern day, and it's peppered with like different kind of angles on romance comics from essayists, and I think it's really good. I think that's a really, really fun issue as a whole. So I would say maybe the romance one's like my favorite issue. They're all good though. I
Solid
think buy
choices.
them all.
Yeah, as you should, because you know what, and they're pretty fairly priced, I will say. I'll have a link for our listeners. I'll have a link to the Panel by Panel magazines. They do this great thing where you could buy bundles of the different of the different years that they put out the magazines. So I'll have a link to that in the show notes if anyone wants to check that out, as well as Strip Panel Naked, which I cannot recommend enough if you like getting into the weeds, into the nuances. Hell, I think your tagline for Strip Panel Naked says it perfectly. Showing you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. I think you accomplished that mission very well. So check that out, folks. Hassan, I want to get back. I want to pivot to talking about your work in lettering, which seems to consume, probably safe to say consumes most of your time now.
Mhm.
I guess, what do you recall? I guess let's start from the beginning of your comic book journey. What was your first conscious exposure to comics? Like, do you remember the first comic you read or the one that made you a fan?
The first comic I read would have been like a Beano or Dandy, which is like these
Hmm.
British like anthology comics, I guess you'd say. They're just like gag comics, and like every kid in England will have read a Beano or Dandy. Of
Hmm.
my age, I don't know what kids read now, like Monster Fun or something like that, or Phoenix,
Hmm.
which is really cool. But anyway, that's a different question. But the Beano and Dandy were like these really fun comics. I had like Dennis the Menace and but the British Dennis the Menace, and they just silly gags, like fun, silly things, Bash Street Kids. There's a lot of fun stuff. So that was I read those, but they were just like the stuff you would read because you didn't read books, like because you were too small to look at lots of words. And then I remember I would get like a lot of Lucky Lukes was kind of like the first time I was kind of like interested in. I think probably like the first time I was like drawing stuff was seeing things in Lucky Lukes. I read a lot of French Lucky Lukes. Um, and then I borrowed a copy of Spy, like, and they used to do these like black and white reprints, Marvel, called Essentials, and they had like 200
Oh,
pages
yeah.
on like crap paper.
Yeah, they were big telephone or
Mm,
phone book size books, cheap paper, and hell, if you can find them now for like $5 in every single discount bin. But yeah, dude, for same here for me. Those were like my gateway into at least like the Marvel universe. But
yeah,
comic books, and my dad used to buy those by the heap, and I would tear through them. Man, yeah, I loved
they
it.
were great. They were
Yeah.
really good. They were really good stories, and they were in black and
Oh
white
yeah.
as well, which I didn't
Hmm.
realize wasn't the norm.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if someone bought me a comic or like I'd gone to a shop and found a comic, and it was in color, and I was like, "Whoa, my god, they do them in color as well! That's insane!" And they look so much
Yeah.
cooler in color. So yeah, and then I kind of just started, and then I had like a burger van job when I was 14, and I was flip burgers in the park, and then I would put all of that money into buying comic books. My dad would like traveled for work, and so I would
Mhm.
email like comic shops in the area he was going to, and I'll be like,
Oh
"Can you
wow.
get this?" And this like Arab guy's going to come in at some point and make a deal with you for the comics. And then my dad would go in, and my
That's
dad
awesome.
hated. Like he would go in, and he was like, I don't want to talk to anyone about comic books." And I was like, "That's fine. I've emailed them. They understand the exchange is happening." And my dad would just like go in with like an envelope of cash and like hand them an envelope of cash and be like, "I'm here for the comics." And they would like hand him a bag of comics, and he would just leave. And that he did that for bless him. He did that for me for like 2 years while I had this burger van. And it's like the only time in my life I've ever had money. So it's like I had 2 years of solid comic buying. And then yeah, and then I got into them. I don't know where I was going. That was my
Dude, that might be one of the best origin stories because there's a lot of similarities to my own. I got into comics same way with the essentials. I worked at Domino's Pizza for my first job. Literally spent 90% of my paycheck on comics. The only
yeah.
difference is I didn't use my dad as a secret agent. I wasn't his agent M, sending him on these missions to get comic books. That's awesome.
He didn't. I don't think he liked it, but he was. But he was. I think it was like what I mean.
Oh,
He was like I don't want
yeah.
to be in these nerdy. I don't want to be seen buying comic books. Like in case people think like, why is that guy buying comic books?
Yeah,
But
he's
he
like,
was.
oh God. He goes up in there like a full like get up looking like Raphael in the suit and TMNT, like the overcoat and all that. That's
Yeah, but he
funny.
did it. He did it. I remember I was talking to him about it recently, and I was like, "Do you remember doing that?" And he was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Did you ever?" Because there was one shop he went to a lot when he was in this
Hmm.
area, and I mean, probably for like most of a year. And I was like, "Did you ever speak to that guy that ran it?" And he was like, "I don't think I said a single word to him." I think I must have just like described my dad or something in one of the emails, and
Yeah,
then my dad was like, after the first couple of times, he just knew, like he knew me, so he just
yeah.
gave it to me. And I left, and I was like, that's unbelievable, that's
Damn.
incredible.
Big shout outs to Pops, man. The things that dads do for their kids, I love it. So I guess what would you say was your first conscious exposure to to like really honing in on lettering and focusing and being impressed by like lettering and that whole aspect of the medium?
It's probably, I mean, before I started lettering, it was probably reading Arkham Asylum, but Gaspar
Hmm.
Saladino's work on Arkham Asylum was probably the first time I was like, oh, that's like there's choices being made that
Hmm.
aren't normal. Not normal, but you know what I mean, that aren't like typical, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, so that's the first one that always sticks in my mind as being like, oh, that's something I've noticed about lettering, and that wasn't. I mean, that wasn't even that long ago, really. Um, and then once I saw that, once you see it, it's kind of like you start like looking at other things and being
Hmm.
like, well, what are they doing? And most, I mean, most especially superhero stuff, like the stuff that I was reading, there is not there is a kind of like a range it falls into, and so it's you tend to see something that doesn't fit that range more directly usually. But then when you look at like other stuff, you look at indie comics and you look at people that cartoonists that do their own hand lettering and stuff, and all of a sudden, like your mind is blown from the possibilities. But within the superhero world, what Saladino did on Arkham Asylum, I think is
Hmm.
so fascinating.
So is it a full circle moment for you, considering that you are the letterer of the Batman City of Madness story arc with Christian Ward, who I think for the most part either this is like a spiritual kind of successor or sequel to Arkham Asylum, or I know it's heavily influenced by Arkham Asylum, but like is it a full circle moment for you to be working on this book as a letterer?
Yeah, that was fun because Chris kind of was like asked me if I wanted to do it, and then which I said yes, like before I even knew what it was, because I just big fan of Chris anyway.
Yeah.
And then he was like, oh, it's kind of like, this was before it was revealed in the third issue how it ties, which I won't say anything because it's worth reading. But there's kind of a direct sort of tie to Arkham Asylum, and so he said that to me early on. He was like, it's kind of like my response or like my follow up or something. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it's kind of like spiritual success was probably the better term.
Yeah.
So to Arkham Asylum, and so that was fun because I was like, as soon as I said that, he said that to me. I was like, oh, that's great because now I can it gives me like a valid reason to go back into that book and kind of like go through it again and see what was going on. So there's loads of stuff in City of Madness that is like an homage to what Gasper did in that book. Like even just like the Batman narration captions was kind of influenced by some of the stuff in the end. Some of the voice for the Batman below is kind of like lifted from like what Gasper did for the Joker and stuff. So it's like that was like a fun way of kind of referencing this thing that
Hmm.
I don't know. They say influential. Like I think it is influential. It's one of those things that you kind of put as like a benchmark for interesting creative choices. So it's fun to be able to like play up to that. Was nice.
Yeah. Uh, so all right, so I guess I should probably take a step back and talk about your first lettering gig and assignment. I read somewhere in an interview where you mentioned that you first got into lettering in 2016 because of a writer friend suggesting that you might be good at it. You mentioned that your first attempt was pretty bad, but you got some great feedback from another letterer, and then you continued to practice and refine your skills. And obviously, you've gotten a bunch of credits and a lot of work. I guess for starters, can you tell me about that first lettering gig? And then I guess in retrospect, with so much experience under your belt now, can you spot like those early mistakes pretty easily? Or is it like, were you making, I guess, pretty common rookie beginner mistakes that a lot of comic letters do?
I haven't looked at it in a while. The very very first thing that I let was a pitch that was putting together, like that I had
Hmm.
written. And it was okay. It was fine. The art was really cool. The uh, lettering was not great. And but what's fun? What the thing is, it's never going to be good the first time you do
Hmm.
it. It's not going to be. It's
For
like
sure.
it's you don't have how do you describe it? It's like you don't really have like a good reference for what you want it to be. Even it's not even like It's not even like I had an idea and I just couldn't match the idea. I just didn't even really have an idea. I was just kind of like following Jim
Yeah.
Campbell, who's a really really good letterer. I followed his
Yeah.
blog to like learn how to use like Illustrator and stuff. But I was just like, is this anything? It wasn't. I didn't even have anything to aspire to. I was just kind of doing stuff, and it was fine. It was okay. I haven't looked at it in a long time because I just know it'll be terrible and it'll be upsetting to look at. But I mean, the problem is, like you asked the question of like, do you look at that stuff and just see problems? And the thing is, like, I look at most of my work and just see problems, no matter at what point it was. I don't. It's hard looking back through stuff because the other thing with lettering is you go through so many pages so fast, like.
Hmm.
I'm hundreds and hundreds of, I mean, literally hundreds of pages a month. And so you're better at the end of February than I was at the start of February. So even the stuff I might look at in January, I'm like, I don't know if I would have still done it like that. I opened up a pitch for a book that got greenlit that I worked on in like 2021, and I opened that up to have a look at that one recently because I had to redo some new pages, and I just had to redo the pages for the pitch as well because I was looking at it and I was like, I can't. It's choices that at the time I'm like, this was a great idea, and now I'm like, I wouldn't do it like that anymore. It's strange how your taste and your kind of like what you think is good or like what you think is working is different, and your mindset can change so quickly. But I mean, 2 years is a very, very long time, I suppose. So, but it's I don't know where I'm going with this answer. I just got excited about saying that.
Well, I guess it might be advantageous to hear your response to this. And I always try to consider that maybe there's someone listening that has no idea about the topic or is coming in of a very rudimentary understanding. In your words, what are the duties of a letterer? And I guess if you could explain it in the sense of like, what is the bare minimum that a letterer is expected to do, and then
Yeah.
on the on the further side of the spectrum, what is an exceptional letterer like? What does that look like?
Do you want the practical like sort of answer, or do you want like the lofty like theoretical answer?
Ooh, I don't know. I'm kind of feeling a lofty. It feels like a lofty Sunday to me. Hit
Because
us with
there's
the
two.
lofty one.
I think there's two things to that. Like there's like what is a letter expected to do is quite simple, really, which is just take what's in the script and put it onto the page. So that's like the bare minimum. I mean that it's take who said the script will say in panel 2 this person says this dialogue. So it's take that dialogue, put it into the script, bold where you've been asked to bold it, italicize where you've been asked to italicize it, whatever. It might say shout, or it might say exclaim or whatever. So put that in a burst, balloon, whatever. But essentially, put the balloons in the order in which they appear in the script, pointing to the people that are saying them. That's like the minimum. Like if you can do that, you've kind of lettered a comic book. But there's like that is if you do that, that doesn't necessarily mean it'll be good. You'll have just done what you needed to do to make it legible. Like I do when I've like kind of done classes about lettering. My example of that is to take like the Arial font, which I guess everyone knows, or like what's the default word for Calibri, and then just put that in a box in a square box with just like a very sharp triangle pointing to the person. And it looks awful, but you have technically done what you've been asked to do if you do that. So the level above that, I guess, is kind of like making it feel that it belongs in the world of the comic book. So we, by using like a comic book font that might be based on like handwriting, so it kind of feels a little bit less digital. Maybe roughening the balloon or putting like a special balloon stroke on to kind of give the balloon the air of like having been drawn rather than like pasted on by a digital machine computer man. So there's like that, and like that's kind of really what you would expect like a professional minimum to be is speaker order, knowing who's saying what, being able to read it. It's like a decent size and legible font and everything like that. But also with just like a touch of like elegance so that it works within the world. But then I think you can go beyond that, which is to say like, how do I, rather than just doing what is the minimum, like how do I bring some storytelling to that? So like that's like design, right? So that might be like, for example, Beneath the Trees. In Beneath the Trees, there's this narration from the main character, and it's just written as narration, right? It's just written as some kind of voiceover thing, and so it's kind of your job to figure out, well, what's that going to look like? Is that just going to be a rectangle with left aligned italicized font in it? Is it going to be something? Is it going to be a phone text? Like, is this a person that maybe like writes this stuff into their phone? Is it just meant to be thoughts? Is it like a journal? I like the idea that like in that book, which is about a murderous bear, like it's like if people haven't read it, it's really good. It's like a Dexter but with bears and other animals. And so for that, I really like the idea that like the main character would like journal stuff. I thought that was kind of like because she makes she makes decisions that are like vaguely questionable. Like in the first episode, she murders someone and buries them, but like too nearby, I think. So I was like, that maybe is she the person that would like write stuff? I don't know. This never comes up in the comic book, but this is like the thing that you're like, well, how do I
Yeah.
decide what this will look like? And so for me, I did like a scrap of paper and like a yellow journal, and I did kind of ragged edges on one side, which is fairly sort of typical comic-y thing to do, but it also means that you can be loose with that. Like we just did issue 5, which is not out yet. I won't spoil anything, but things get a little bit hairier in issue 5, and so you can play with the captions a little bit. I like kind of had all the caption tore around the entire caption, so there was no kind of straight clean edges, so it felt a bit messier. So these are all decisions that you want to make. I sometimes will like add sound effects if they're not in the script, if I feel like it needs it, or I like on certain books, like What's the Furthest Place from Here, I might throw like a joke in if I think it's funny and see if Matt Rosenberg and Tyler Boss, who work on that, like that joke. So there is like a range to your job. It's not just take the script and put it onto the page, but that is a perfectly reasonable way to do it. But like I like to, I suppose, try and like kind of like push to put a bit more of me into it, which is not that as to everyone's taste as well. That's not necessarily the right thing to do, but you learn quickly if people don't like it, and then you don't do it anymore. But I think it's like, how do you use the lettering to add to the storytelling? Yeah. Because there's this adage, this lettering adage, and this is a really long answer. I'm sorry, please. This is like the one thing that everyone ever knows about lettering is that good lettering is invisible, which to me is like the complete. It's not even that that's not right, I don't think, because it's not that it's wrong either, but it's not even that it's like the right question or the right thing to say. It's because everything is invisible until you don't want it to be invisible anymore, and that's the lettering should work the exact same way as that. Like the example I always give is in comics, like, so, everything will be colored normally, and there might be a fight scene, and then in the fight scene someone might get punched in the face or shot or whatever, and the panel will turn red. Like the colorist might color that panel like red background. That's not to say that the world has suddenly turned red, but it's like an emotive response, and you notice it. It doesn't take you out of the story. It heightens that moment, and I think lettering can be used in the same way. So I always find that idea of like, well, letterers should just be kind of doing a style that's very incognito and isn't noticed by anyone. You do that until you want to make something bigger and louder, or make something stand out, or use your sort of skill set of lettering to elevate the story, the narrative. That to me is like where you would take it. That's like the next level of good lettering, I think.
That was a really well said answer, and I'm glad you brought up that old adage of lettering. I think the first time I ever heard it was from was actually from a professional comic letterer, and a good friend of mine and a co-host early in the early days of the show. His name was Adam Wallet. Big shout out to Adam. But he's lettered comics. He's written comics for like Action Lab. He's done a bunch of comic lettering as well, and he was the first person to. Like years ago when we first started this show, when he was coming on as a co-host, he was the one that kind of like talked about that adage of like, good lettering, you don't notice it. Bad lettering, you absolutely notice it. Where does lettering fit into the comic book making process? Is it at the end like most of us would assume, or is it like, do you get involved early on when we're talking scripting and plotting, or even before pencils are laid out?
It's I mean, for the most part, it's we come in at the end. Like sometimes over the inks. Sometimes it's not an ideal way to work, but sometimes over the inks, usually preferably kind of like you'll get the finished colors, the finished script, and then it's your time to kind of like assess what that should look like and figure out the style guide and stuff like that. And it's sometimes, depending on the project, you might get brought in early. And people might have like, because I remember I got brought in early for one project that not announced, and they were kind of like wanted to like figure some stuff out on the lettering design side before anything was like advanced in the story side. So sometimes, but it's rare. It's mostly you're going to come in at the end when everything else pretty much is finished, and then it's your job just to kind of like wrap up the book. Most professional, I mean, when I say professional letterers, like what I guess I mean, I'm being very specific, and I mean like direct market American comic letterers use Adobe Illustrator. And then there's like a whole suite, like a whole bunch of stuff within Illustrator that you can use to like undigitalize. That's not the right term, but the look of the balloon. So like you can create
Mhm.
custom brush strokes and things. Like it's quite fun to like draw stuff on paper, scan it in, and then turn that into a brush stroke. So it's kind of got some like analog feel to it. But people, I mean, you can do anything. Like you can letter in anything. I don't think like if you want to be a professional letterer that letters like DC books or whatever, you'll be using Illustrator. If you want to just letter comic books, you can use anything. You can hand letter, you can use Photoshop, you can use whatever like Affinity Designer or whatever, like whatever Illustrator like tools there are. It doesn't really matter. The end result is the end result ultimately.
Hmm.
But professional letterers in the field of like direct market comics usually have a certain workflow that publishers are expecting. That's a very dry answer. Is that is
No,
that
no,
kind of
look, I think that is an honest answer, and sometimes like when we're talking about work, it's a dry, it's dry, it's clear cut, right? So
I
no,
don't know how
I
to
think
make
that's a great
Illustrator
answer.
more exciting. I like I've spent years trying to figure
I'm
out how
actually
to. I don't really know how to.
I'm currently trying to learn. I've got some experience of like Photoshop. I know my way around, but for work, I'm starting to use InDesign.
Mhm.
And that to me is like almost like a foreign language. So there is no way to make, Adobe products fun, I think. I think Photoshop is probably like the funnest,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
funnest program of that suite. Everything else is a little more nuanced, but it's good to hear like, the tools in case there is someone that's aspiring to maybe do lettering. Now, in terms of the process, because, once again, to bring up Adam, he was like my insight into the world of lettering. It was like, I got to ask him all these questions. And I think, he was also telling me about things that most comic readers and fans just don't really know about the job. It's not just, putting words to balloons and things like that, but it's also, and maybe you could chime in on this, but like the other aspects of the job. And I don't know if it's just native to what he was doing in his projects, but things like, preparing the comic books and the files for printing and that kind of, I won't say admin, but it's the word that comes to mind, but like that kind of administrative task. Can you talk about maybe things that a normal reader, a comic fan is not privy to that a letterer does that might surprise them or give them new insight?
Yeah, it's a range really. Like I mean, for example, like DC have got their own pre-press department. So for DC, I'm just kind of like I deliver like letter only files
Hmm.
that just have like the balloons, the sound effects,
Okay.
and the dialogue on them that are kind of in a locked format. So it's not like live fonts or anything like that. And then DC works their magic, and their great designers kind of lay everything out and design everything. Um, but on an image book, I might be like, I might be doing the whole, I might be putting the whole book together, like
Oh,
the
wow.
front, the inside credits, and the mapping the cover out and stuff like that. So it is like it's quite a varied. I say there, it's not that varied. You're either doing the pages or you're doing the whole book. There's a limit to the variability, but there's a range of like what you are expected to be doing. But you do have to have a sense of like you have to have a sense of like how things will print, and that's quite hard without seeing stuff in print. So I like print stuff off of my crappy inkjet to see if it'll look okay. But it's and if it prints okay on my crap inkjet, it's probably going to be okay on like a
Hmm.
good print press. But sometimes there's like little things that you maybe never if you didn't study graphic design, you didn't study any like a pre-press kind of job that maybe you don't necessarily think about, like you want to do a colored font, you want to do a green dialogue font or whatever. Is that 2 colors CMYK? Is it 4 colors CMYK? How much ink can you put into that before it starts to get messy? Boring, so boring, but like so valuable to know.
Hmm.
It'll never be useful in any conversation or in any other facet of life to know, is it a good idea to print point 0.8 dialogue in 4 color CMYK, or should I stick to 2 colors? You should stick to 2 colors, really. You could probably do a touch of black at the end, but it's that it's not going to be a fun conversation to anyone else, but it's so valuable to know, because if you
Hmm.
get that wrong when that book prints, it's going to be a mess. And so there's a lot of stuff like that, like overprints and transparencies and masks and all this stuff that is kind of useful for you to learn. Well, you'll learn it because you'll either get it wrong or you'll learn it. And I got loads of this stuff wrong when I was starting, and probably still get a lot of it wrong now.
Hmm.
But it's so there's all this kind of really technical knowledge that's quite dry and specific that you'll learn in the job. that doesn't necessarily play into it. That it's not. I don't know how to describe. It's not like you think about it. It's just there. It's like learned knowledge that just sits there.
Yeah, yeah. There's some nuances and things in the work you do that is just understood. What is the phrase? Sometimes when something is real, I forget the phrase. It's like some things don't need to be said. It's just understood. That's just how real it is, And
Yeah,
sometimes you
yeah,
just gotta
yeah,
be you gotta be in it to kind of get that unspoken understanding and whatnot.
yeah, yeah.
I guess hearing you say all this, who are some letterers that you look up to or you're inspired by, and I guess like and maybe just to really enhance that question, if you had to make and really put you on the spot, unfortunately, if you had to make like a Mount Rushmore of like all-time great comic book letterers, who would be on that Mount Rushmore for you?
See, this is tough because I don't I think the most interesting letter is in terms of like who do you look to inspire you. I look at like a lot of stuff that isn't
Hmm.
like comic like direct market comic book lettering.
Okay.
I read Lucy Bryan's Thieves, which is an incredible French graphic novel from last year, maybe 2022. And like the lettering in that I think was done by Lucy is just like mind blowing. It's like phenomenal because it's so baked into the story, and it like you know people someone will say something and the balloons will drip and like or someone will have like a moment of falling in love or whatever and the balloon will just completely change not even that it'll change, like it'll just be like a different thing, it'll be like a cloud or whatever. So that like I always find that really fascinating, that and looking like what like Jaime Hernandez does in Love and Rockets is really really
Hmm.
interesting, but these aren't necessarily things that I don't know that I'm like is are they the best letterers? They are like incredible at lettering their own work because it's so intrinsic to the like the texture of their work.
Mhm.
But that's the stuff that I always like to look at is like how do cartoonists letter their own stuff, because that's to me like where you really start to see the synergy of the art and the words and the
Hmm.
style of the lettering. But I think in terms of like direct market stuff, like Adichie Bidikar is like king to me. He gave me tons of help and advice and everything when I was starting out, and him and people like Russ Wooten were
Yep.
like who I see as the kind of uh they transitioned digital lettering into like a next phase of going, okay, we understand how to like do good digital lettering, and now we're going to go like how do we elevate this to something else. And I think they, not that they're the only two people that do that, but I think I always picture them in my head as being like the two guys that were like pushing stuff in that direction. So I'd like two of them for me for sure. I'm a huge fan of Becca Carey. I think Becca Carey, she does like a bunch of the Massiveverse stuff.
Hmm.
And I think her lettering is really, really, really good. And she doesn't letter a lot, but she does a lot of like graphic design stuff. She does some really cool Buffy covers as well. And so she has like a really good graphic design mind that like plays into the lettering. Um, so that's really good. I just yeah, I don't know. Is that a good enough answer? I feel bad
That
that I'm
is a
not
fan.
saying more letterers, but like, it's like the thing is, it's like I think it's good. I think it's interesting to look outside of what people are doing in
Hmm.
the field to see what you can bring in. Because if we just keep looking inside, we're looking at like people kind of who are doing the same thing. Whereas if you start looking outside at like again like Lucy Bryan or whatever, you start to see like ways that exist that no one else is doing in the
Hmm.
sphere that you work in, which is a
You, you
long-winded
know.
way of saying just look at other things. But yeah, I mean, and also, I mean,
Yeah.
I said Gasper earlier. You like what Todd Klein and Clem Robbins have done in terms of like, it's so interesting because I've talked about like Russ and Aditya, like doing stuff to push lettering in different ways. What Todd and what Clem have done specifically is turn their hand lettering style into a
Hmm.
very, very, very clever bunch of like font software in a way that they are able to mimic the hand lettering that they used to do in a really clever way. So like Todd just turned all of his styles into fonts, and so Todd's post digital lettering work kind of looks really really similar to his
Hmm.
like hand lettering work. It's still Todd Klein. If you look at Clem has got this insane font that has like tons and tons of variations of like every single letter, because he's got also like, you know, tons of hand lettering that he did previously to draw on. And so when you look at Clem's stuff now, it looks like Clem, but I don't. It's hard. Like it's hard. I would think it would be hard for most readers to know what's digital and what's been hand done with Clem. It's very clever. Um, but yeah, so there's all these different facets of lettering. But I think it's always fun to look at like the people lettering their own work and see how they do it, because it's just so much more ingrained in the texture of it in an interesting way. I don't
Really
want to
well.
upset any. I feel like I've just said that all letterers are less interesting, but that's not. It's not.
I,
I think lettering is a different. It's lettering someone else's work is like a world of its own. It's like a whole
hmm.
interesting art form. But it's I just really like looking at like cartoonists who letter their own stuff and just seeing what they're doing.
I had on that topic. I did have a question on here about, is there a vast difference in different forms of comic books? Comic books. I'm sorry. Is there a vast difference in the lettering approach or process when it comes to different forms of comic books? And I'd say different forms of comic books with the understanding, knowing they're all comic books, but like does it differ? Does lettering differ in a manga versus webtoons versus original OGNs, graphic novels, and illustrated books? Like,
Mhm.
is the process does the medium, does the sub medium, I guess, sub genre, whatever, does that dictate how the lettering process is done, or is it still on the letterer themselves and their creative decisions?
Yeah, it's. I mean, yeah, it's all really really different. I mean, like so
Hmm.
manga lettering. Like I can only talk to it, and I've never really done this before, but just from my
Sure. Sure.
understanding of it, like I can only talk to it from like the translation side. So when you're doing manga translations, you're working mostly within the boundaries of like the lettering balloons that have been drawn in the original Japanese. Um,
Huh.
but lettering manga is unbelievable, because some of the stuff that manga letters have to do, like redraw backgrounds, like all the hand lettered sound effects, is just like phenomenal. It's like that is like there are so many great manga letterers. If you're interested, follow Sarah Lindsay on whatever social media platform of your choice. But you'll see like just this fascinating world that is so unrelated to what like American Western comic letterers do, with a whole different skill set as well. But yeah, if you're doing like if you're doing like a kids graphic novel, just basic stuff like the font's probably going to be a little bit bigger, but also you kind of got to be aware of your audience. Like if I'm doing something where this is being pitched to direct market readers, who have probably read like a bunch of comics, you can be a little bit more fanciful in some of your choices in terms of like even style but also placement. Whereas if you're making something that's probably going to be read by this could be that someone's first comic and they're like 10 years old or whatever, you're probably going to sit balloons higher at the top of the panel. You're going to make it much clearer. You're probably not going to put them in kind of, sometimes you'll put a balloon somewhere to highlight something on a panel to make a point about something. You're probably going to do less of that for a comic where you just want to make it really clear and readable, as like the primary goal. Um, so there are choices, yeah. And I mean, webtoons, it's way bigger because you're reading on the phone, so the font you can't really do it at the same font size that you would do a print book at. So there are like technical things that come to the forefront, but there's also like creative decisions that you want to kind of, even down to genre as well, right? Like I don't want to necessarily letter a horror book the same way, even in style, the same way that I would letter like a high fantasy book, because I want the lettering to match some of like the grim tone or whatever. Someone's got a fanciful voice, it's probably going to be a bit creepier in a horror book, and I'm going to make it drip and whatever, compared to a high fantasy where maybe it's got like I don't know, I'm just making things up now, like a gold glow behind it when an elf talks. I don't know anything about anything, but you know what I mean. Like there's choices,
Yeah.
even down to the molecular level or whatever. There's like choices that you wouldn't make in one form that you would make in the other. Same as like genre choices and things like that.
Man, the passion that you speak about the different aspects of lettering is really refreshing to hear, and it got me thinking about what I was thinking earlier while I was getting ready for the show was, when did I start noticing Hassan's name on being credited as the letterer, and I think it was either with from it was either the Blue Flame series from Vault Comics, it might have been Project Patron, or Above Snakes from Image.
Mhm.
I think that's when I was like, oh shit, the same dude that does panel by panel and strip panel naked is a letterer now? Okay. And and I don't know if it's just a case of I don't know what they call it. I don't know if I was just looking for your name or I noticed it, but then I just started noticing your name on a lot of titles. And
It's
I mean,
quite a
this is
long
not a
name,
full
to be fair, as well. Like, it takes up a lot of
I,
space.
that it does. And you know what? And I say that, the best way possible. That it does, but what's interesting is that your name is on the covers of books, and I don't know if that is a conscious thing to sell the books. If publishers and writers want that to be known that, hey, the same guy is doing the lettering, or if maybe the attitude and perception of letterers has changed. Like what do you think? Do you think that letterers are still maybe the unspoken or read? I say all this in jest, obviously. Are letterers getting the credit they deserve, or do you think there's still room for them to be appreciated and given the credit in comics?
Too much credit, probably.
Hmm.
I think most of us. No, I'm joking. I think most of us are.
You had me there for a second.
I think I know you said. I saw your reaction. I was like, wait. I don't genuinely mean that. No. Yeah. I mean, this is like a publisher-specific thing. I think. Like, I don't think that I've been credited on things where like letterers haven't been credited before. I don't.
Okay.
I don't think it's like a situation where I'm not credited. I'm credited like Image is down to the creators normally. So there's like some Image books where I'm not on the cover. There's some Image books where I'm on the cover. DC, I don't think they put letterers on as like as a general rule.
Okay.
Rarely, I don't think anyway. Unless it's just me. But so it kind of comes down to the publisher. So I don't think there's any special consideration given to, if anything, mine. As I say, my name is legitimately more annoying to put on the cover because it's a bit too long. So I'm more than happy to be left off the cover. I think the thing is, it's like the response to like the respect or whatever of the craft is I don't think I don't know, it's one of those things that it's not really down to, it shouldn't be down to people to decide to respect it or not. It's a kind of irrelevant, I think. It's more just like, is there space to do interesting work? I think that's probably kind of more what I would think about. Like, it doesn't really matter to, outside of like wanting to get jobs so I can pay bills and stuff, it doesn't really matter like if people are like, that's a good letter or that's a bad letter. It's more like the relationship that I have with the creative teams that I work with. Like, are we working in a way that's kind of like cohesive as a team? And is there space for me to kind of do like the way that I like to work, right? Is there space for me to kind of work in the way that I would like to work? But I do think that I talked about like Russ, Wooten, and Aditya earlier. Like, I think thanks to the work that has been put down by people like that, and also, Gasper and Todd, Nate Picos, like all these people that have kind of sort of paved the way, I guess, and sort of set the tone for kind of lettering being a useful part of the storytelling medium, as opposed to just the way that we get to read the words. Like, there is a value to it on the page. That is all huge, and I think they set the kind of like example of like you picking a certain letter will give you a different book. And I think like if it wasn't for people like that, then I mean, and that's people spanning a lot of time, right? There's a whole big range of people, Pat Brosso, Clem, that I talked about, like that you were doing really, really good lettering work, and just making sure that people were aware that like there are decisions being made that aren't just technical decisions. And so if you replace me, like if you take me like like Poison Ivy or whatever, right? If you take me off of Poison Ivy and you put a different letter on, it will be different. The story's going to be the same. Probably the art's just going to be the same, but like there will be something that's different. Now, if that's noticeable to anyone, I don't know. If that makes any difference to the way that people engage with that book, I have no idea. Obviously, I'd like to say yes, but I have no idea. We're still a very replaceable part of the industry, like of the process, and I don't think anyone has any misgivings about that. Like, you could take me off a book and replace me, and like 99% of people they're not gonna care. They're still getting the book that they want, if that makes sense. But my goal, I suppose, is always to try and make replacing me as difficult as possible. Because you want
there we go, yeah.
But what I mean by that is like you want to be adding something to the experience.
For sure.
So like if that's the way that you work with people, that it might just be that. It might just be, trying to be helpful and have a good relationship with the people you work with. It might be that you throw a gag in, as I said, like with like what's the furthest place from here or something that isn't in the book already. So it's just doing something that just like why hire me? What's the point in hiring me if we're all so like replaceable? Which I don't know. Maybe it's a bad thing to say. I kind of believe that, but if we can all do the job, right? If we can all do the job, like what's the difference between me and someone else? Like what can I offer that someone else can't offer? And so all I can offer is my own sort of process, an artistic process, I guess. That's the only thing that's going to separate most of us because we're all doing the same technical process, really. So I don't know. I honestly can't even remember what the question was, but I've gone down. I'm at the end. I've hit a wall, and I don't know where else to go.
I'm enjoying everything you're saying, and I think being too modest, man. I think you bring a certain special sauce to the titles that you work on, especially thinking about Beneath the Trees, the vibe that your lettering gives it, that it matches it, and then it also enhances like that eerie kind of like something's not right here, vibe that I get, and then also. Your work on Above the Snakes, I think that was the title, right? Above the Snakes,
Above Snakes, yeah.
Above Snakes. Thank you. Above Snakes was one of those moments where I definitely noticed the lettering because I was poring over like how it worked and the choices that you made. So I think you're the secret sauce, man. I think the lettering can sometimes be the secret sauce that either people will appreciate or it'll be a silent appreciation. And I wanted to, obviously, this is not a comprehensive list here. There's definitely things that I didn't include on here, but I wanted to mention just some of the projects that either I personally enjoyed or I've just noted for whatever arbitrary reason. But the question that I'm going to toss you is, what title what title pushed you to take your job to the next level, or maybe try new things, or just think outside the box? I mean, some of the projects that I've always been impressed with include your work on All Against All. I mentioned the new Kid Cudi, Kyle Higgins comic, Moon Man. I thought your work in that was great in the first issue. You've worked on Batman Beyond, Beneath the Trees, Bitter Root, The Flash, Red Sonja, Vampirella. Like, is there a project on here I didn't name that you're like, no, this is the one that really took my work to the next level?
This is like going to be one of those probably quite a boring answer, but I think the thing is like each thing has such a different personality. Well, most things have such a different personality. Like there's some stuff that you kind of take from one thing to another, but like everything's got its own. Everything's got like its own challenge to solve. Like on All Against All, right? Has like we had these alien things that are like in these robot suits, and so they all had to sort of talk the same in my head anyway. But it's quite hard to differentiate them on purpose. And so like there was a challenge of like, well, how do we give them all different personalities? How do we like what's this going to look like? And also Casper Wingard's art, and that was like mind blowing. And it was like, how do I do that while like falling into the thing that he's made? So that was a really tough challenge. Above Snakes had a similar thing where like Hayden's art is just incredible.
Yeah.
And Sean had such a specific kind of tone to it, and what Hayden was doing with the art was like grounded and gritty and kind of visceral, but also had like a Blueberry kind of Mobius sort of European quality to it. So I wanted to bring that to it. So it's like everything's got a chat. Like it's the beauty of it is like that. Even if you end up working again with the same artist. So I worked with Josh Hickson on Shanghai Red. I worked with him on Children of the Woods, and I worked with him on The Deviant, which is coming out now. And each of those three things is lettered differently, even though it's the same artist. Josh hasn't. I mean, Josh's style and stuff is kind of changing, but it's still Josh's work. And so it's like, how do you adapt yourself to the story you're telling, to the style that you're telling it in, to the genre and everything. So even when you're working with the same person, it's still a different process. Like John Pearson. So I've done three things with John Pearson, and his art is also changing, and that's kind of the nature of his style. But it's like, why I don't want to letter him the same way every single time. I was just doing this with Erica Henderson recently because I did two short stories with Erica Henderson, two short stories with Erica Henderson for the Harley Quinn backups, and it's still Erica's work, but Erica's doing like a different genre thing in each of these different stories, and it's like, well, how do I adapt this thing that I think fits Erica's art to these different styles? And so no matter the job, I think the fun thing is like, how do I approach it with a different take of the, even though you're kind of sometimes doing the same sort of thing. So I don't think there's a particular book that was like, this made me better. I think they all make you better, because you learn, you make mistakes in all of them, you learn from all of those things. But everyone's got a challenge.
It almost sounds like compounding, like interest for you, in the sense that you get all of these different projects that challenge you and maybe make you think in different ways. And I imagine at some point you're building like this, you're building your skill set, your knowledge base that you could always kind of dip into. I guess what I'm saying is, at some point you're going to probably have covered or worked on every kind of genre, or maybe format, that you're building like a toolbox that you could pull from. Like, oh yeah, I did something a little bit like this in this project way back. I can bring that element here and maybe combine it with this. That's what it kind of sounds like to me.
Yeah, it's the thing is, you find stuff that works, and that I think is bad. It can be quite bad, because it's easy when you've got this thing where you go like, I know that this thing works, that you go, this new book comes in, you go, well, I'll just do that thing because I know it works. Like that's what is hard, and it's just a job as well at the end of the day. So it's like, you've got like deadlines to hit, and you've got like things to do outside of your work life. And so sometimes in your head, your head's like, well, just do this because it works. Like it'll look good and it'll work. But that's not necessarily like satisfying most of the time. So it's like, it's also fighting that urge to just say like, I know let's just do that because I know it'll work. So it's especially with like when you're working with the same people and the same artists and stuff, it's so easy just to be like, well, that'll be fine. Like, let's just do that again, because it might not be the right fit for that tone. So yeah, but you're right. Like you learn stuff and it's just in there. So you like, I know that'll work, or I know that font works at this point size. I know that font pairs nicely with this shout font, for example. Like you've got these things in your head that make the process way quicker. But yeah, it's also like, you just kind of, it's like you want to keep yourself on your toes yourself as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you got to keep it fresh some way. Which kind of leads me to this question here. Do you have a preference when it comes to whether working on a limited series or like a longer run that might exceed like, the 6 or 8 issue miniseries? Do you have a preference?
Well, I mean, it's nicer to know you've got like 10 months of a book in terms of scheduling and financial security. But no, I don't think so. Like, again, it's kind of like things change. So your first issue of something is I don't think you approach it in the same way. Like I just finished, but the thing is, you also don't really get a chance to work on long stuff. Well, I don't anyway, like that frequently, because I don't do a ton of long running superhero stuff. So the longest book I think I've done is Time Before Time, the Image book with that Dec Shalvey co-wrote with Rory McConville, and we did 29 issues of that, and that was good. And I think I don't know if anyone else will see it, but like I can see the difference between issue 1 of that and issue 29 of that. But you get a lot of confidence. I think that's nice. You get a lot of confidence with those long-running series, and you get really comfortable in them. Like, what'll work, how to do certain things. I mean, the fun thing with Time Before Time was the artists. We had like 5 or 6 different artists on that series, so there was always something to catch you off guard with, which was quite good fun. But yeah, I don't know. Like with Poison Ivy, we're coming up to, I think I've done 20 issues of Poison Ivy, and Willow put so much gross things, creepy things into that series that there's always some grim voice you've got to design, or there's always some gross thing to come up with. So like even 20 issues in, there's still, there's still surprises. So
I guess to pivot off that, considering how many comic series you've worked on, the different creative team, which means, you've worked with a lot of different creatives, writers, artists, inkers, colorists, etc. Are there any pages of original art that you've received that have just absolutely floored you or wowed you, or just like, just have been ingrained in your memory?
I don't think I've got any pages from things that I've worked on. actually.
Like like
But
like
there,
if you could like if you were given the opportunity to own an original page of a project that you worked on, are there any that like immediately come to mind like, oh, I wish I would have had, this page from this, series?
no, I tell a lie. I tell a lie. I've got two. I've got two. I've got one from Owen Marin from Killer Groove, which was an
Hmm.
aftershock book I did a few years ago, which is a really cool page. And I've got from Felix and Macabre. I have there's a the introduction of the Macabre character. I've got the first page of that. That was cool. I mean, I would have that whole book, but if Junie would have given it to me. But I don't know if I had space in my house to store it. But yeah, probably those. Yeah, I've got like I mean,
Hmm.
above my head is a page from the Moon Knight series that Deck drew,
Oh wow.
um, which was a gift from my partner, and I've got Daniel Warren Johnson sent me a page of Extremity,
Come on, man.
which was really really cool. That was a
I
nice
bet.
surprise. Yeah, that was very kind.
Wow. Like, do you walk a fine line when it comes to, I guess, like when you're receiving the original art and it's your turn to do the job and place, have the word balloon placement? Like, is there like, is there a dance to it? Like, do you want to be sensitive to the art? And I guess is there any hesitance, or do you get over that pretty quickly? Because as you've said multiple times, it's the job, right? It's like my turn. It's I guess, can you explain that kind of dichotomy of like wanting to respect the artist and their creative decisions, but also asserting your own perspective and creativity?
Yeah, I think the thing is, I think most of the time when you see, yeah, I think most of the time when you look at pages, like you get a sense after time of like where an artist wants you to letter things.
Hmm.
Like most artists, like a lot of artists will put like the balloons, like the roughs of the balloons, like in their pages. And so when you see a piece of comic book art without balloons in it, a lot of the time you can just look at it and you'll be like, oh yeah, it's gonna go there.
Hmm.
Like you just know you can tell that the artist is asking you to put the balloon in that space. So that makes it a lot easier when you can tell that that it's been planned for. Sometimes you work on stuff and there's not a lot of space and you're not fighting the art, but it's a bit tougher to work around it. But that rarely happens, I think. But I just do it. I just do it in a way that makes sense to me.
Hmm.
And with the idea of like, if the artist was lettering this, would they do it like this? Maybe. I think they would maybe draw this thing in, or like, draw this sound effect there, or whatever. And if people don't like, I mean, the fun thing about digital lettering is, if people don't like it, you can just take it out. It's very easy. So I like my that's usually like my philosophy is I'd rather give you something that's too much, and then you are like, just bring that down. Don't do that again. But and I would rather than give you something where people look at it and be like, yeah, okay.
Hmm.
That I think that's, but I don't think that's the best response. So, uh, yeah, I don't, I'd rather like try it and miss than
Hmm.
not try it. I guess is what I mean.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, shoot for the stars and see where you land. I mean, the worst they could do is say no and control Z all day. Um, which I guess, uh, considering like your occupations as and projects and things that you've worked on, a writer, director, years of experience, like examining the medium of comics under like a critical eye. Would you say that working in comics has come easy for you now, or is there still like a level of difficulty taking theory and actually applying that to practice? And I guess maybe this is more so relevant to you, in your early days of getting into lettering, like you're known as someone that is able to examine and tell you why a comic book works. Was it pretty easy? Was it pretty easy, and is it pretty easy currently for you to do the work that you do?
Um, yeah, well, it's things. I think it's just one of those things where like things just get easier the more you do it. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's easy. But it's not. It's easy. I think it's easy because of experience. There's still stuff that's tough, but like, um, I know how to let a comic book, which I didn't know like 7 years ago. So like I know it. I guess it's like I have an easy. I talked earlier, right, about how like when I first did the thing, I didn't even have an idea of a thing I was trying to reach for. I was just
Hmm.
doing a bad job. Now it's like what I'm reaching for and what the end result is closer, which I think is probably the way to mark like how sort of better, how much better you are at a job. Like if I'm gonna, I can picture something and I can get fairly close to it. So so it's easier for sure. Yeah. I don't the theory stuff. Look, I don't know that the theory stuff is like a day-to-day forefront of the mind concern. I think it's just one of those things where like it becomes embedded in your process, I guess. But yeah, I think it's definitely easy. I don't know if it's easy, but it's not. I mean, it's not. I listen. There's a lot. It's an easy job. Like realistically, it's not a hard. It's not like a hard job. I don't want anyone that has like a proper job to listen to this and be like, oh, this guy's like talking about how this is a really difficult time. It's not. Realistically, it's a pretty easy job.
And probably fun as hell, considering all the art that you get to like just see and just to be a fly on the wall. I think on some of the things that you get to work on and see and you're privy to for the comic stuff. I mean, I know it for sure interests me a lot.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. I like. I've got. It's not. I can't really argue with that. It's a fun job. It's like there are at the end. Like I don't. It's a job at the end of the day as well. Like there is a lot that goes on that you're like, ugh. But it's just. But it's. There are things like there were worse jobs to have.
Oh, for sure.
The way to put it.
There's a few jobs. The hot dog cart or the hamburger cart, like you were saying.
That was a pretty good job, man. To be honest, like I quite like that job.
You know what? I'm kind of in the same boat with my old first job, Domino's. I kind of miss having a free pizza and concocting the weirdest freaking ingredients out there. But where was I going to say? Oh, I guess like with your direct involvement with the comic book industry and the comic making process and all the work that you've been able to do, has that informed or influenced like the content that you create with either panel by panel or strip panel naked? Like, has it inspired you to come up with maybe cover comics in a different angle that you weren't doing so prior to like being so involved and becoming so such an acclaimed letterer at this point?
That's a good question. That is a really good question. I don't think I've got a good answer for it. I don't think so. I guess it. I don't know. I guess it must have done.
Maybe unconsciously.
Yeah, but I can't think of a good
subconsciously. Sorry.
Yeah, I can't think of a good example of how. So that's a really bad answer. We can cut that. I don't have a good response for that. I don't think so. Like there's not anything I can point to and be like, yeah, things shifted when I think they're all kind of like siloed off. They're all kind of different jobs. So I don't think so.
Okay. All good. Well then let me ask you this in place of that. And maybe this was a question I should have asked in the beginning, but as someone who I think I really appreciate your work ethic is among other things. I really appreciate your work ethic on top of the quality you put out, the admiration you have for comics, but the work ethic. And I think it comes from, being a podcaster myself, knowing how many hours goes into just making a podcast. I've been dabbling in YouTube, so I have a sense of like how much work goes into just the YouTube sphere. So I really respect and admire your work ethic. And it got me thinking like, man, this dude has, for the most part, built like a multifaceted kind of media brand. You've got Panel by Panel, the magazine, 2-time, Eisner award-winning magazine. You got the YouTube channel, highly acclaimed, beloved. And then for a while, you were also doing a podcast yourself. You're a comic letterer. And I'm like, man, that's so much time spent on just thinking about comics. And I guess to ask a very basic question, I guess why comics? Like, why the medium of comics? What is it about this medium that you like so much, that you find so special, that you dedicate so much time into?
Well, I've stopped doing most of those things just because it was a lot of time.
Sure,
but
yeah.
the why can't it's just really interesting. And I think it doesn't get like we don't. I don't think we treat it like in the we don't treat it with the sort of reverence that we treat a lot of other mediums. For whatever other people smarter than me can give you an explanation as to why that is. But there's, in other places like it, there's like the thing in Europe they call it like the ninth art or whatever, where because they kind of like look at it as a valuable artistic medium. And like not really as much in like America or even in British comics as much. And so I think that's a shame, firstly, because there's some. But I think it's also just if I can, again, it's not. I don't. This is probably just being very British, but it's not about me. But it's like if there is an opportunity to put more light onto something that's really interesting, I think that's good for all of us to kind of like reassess and look at it in a different way and see comics as like, because so often they're seen as just this disposable thing, but to stop and be like, there's a lot of craft and attention that someone has put into this. And if regardless of if it takes you 5 minutes to read it, or it's like I don't know, Ulysses, where I can't read Ulysses, it's too much, but I try to think of like what have I read? The Power Broker, right? Robert Caro's The Power Broker, like 1,500 pages on Bob Moses and the state park system in New York, right? So it's like, regardless of like how long it takes you to read a thing, or there is a level of care and craft that has gone into it that is, I think, worth kind of celebrating. But like that's my that was kind of my original like run into this sort of stuff was reading comics and being like, we should be talking about like the interesting decisions that people are making in this process, because there isn't really a lot of stuff that at the time anyway, there wasn't a lot of stuff that I found that was doing that sort of thing. So that's always been the interest for me, is to celebrate this thing that I really like, and just point to things that I think are really interesting and be like, isn't that interesting? And then people can say yes or no. But that's kind of, what I mean? Like, that's just, that was just always my driving goal. Is that that's not a term. Driving force. There you go.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. And, I think considering the acclaim, the subscribers on YouTube, all that, I think there's a lot of people that are saying, yes, please, talk about and celebrate it to the level that you're doing. And I noticed that your pinned tweet on Twitter is one from 2019. It's a photo of it is a pinned tweet. It is a photo of an Eisner Award for Best Comics Related Periodical and Journalism for Panel by Panel. Your caption is very simple. It's LOL, so weird. And I was curious, like, considering, your, celebrating comics and the nuance and, upholding this medium as a true art form, like, what was the feeling like to be recognized in that way? Like, here on the show, we say, and, something that has always been described when it comes to the Eisners, it's like, that's the Grammys of comic books. That's what, if you're chasing that as your sense of like goal and wanting that kind of, what's the word I'm thinking of? Celebration, I guess, or achievement, like that is what you strive for. That's what a lot of people strive for, to become an Eisner, award-winning so-and-so comic creator. Like, what was that like for you? Like to win an Eisner for, panel by panel, something that celebrates the medium.
It was, do you know what? It was a cool day because it was the day the 2019 one was the day that Algeria won the African Cup of Nations as well, which was,
oh wow,
that was
so you were celebrating.
Yeah, it was a really that was a fun day. Yeah, it was good. It was cool. It's nice to you call it the Grammys of comics. I think that they're kind of like the Oscars of comics, if no one cared about the Oscars. It's not. It's a very because I mean, they are like within the industry. They're highly revered. But if you mention it to anyone that doesn't, I mean, not even people that don't read comics, like a lot of people that read comics. If you mention it to anyone that doesn't want to try and get one, the response is like, I don't know what that is. So that feels quite mean. But it's just a British thing again. I'm just putting myself down. I'm really sorry. I won't do it anymore for the rest of this podcast.
No, I should be used to this because Big Deck, as you call Declan Shelby, he was kind of the same way. He was like, look, it's just in our nature not to like, big ourselves up or talk about our achievements.
The thing for me that because panel by panel was is not, it is like a thing that I started, but it's like as I said before, like my involvement in that is I consider that my involvement in that to be quite minimal. Like to me, that for me was a showcase for everyone that wrote for that magazine.
Yeah.
And so like my job on that was to showcase their work as best as I possibly could, like as best design as I could, and get it into as many people, in front of as many people as I could. Like my job was to help the writers in that magazine. And like I think like we did that, and I'm glad that it got the recognition, because I think the recognition was for those people. Like you know, if you could, again, it's not about replacing me with lettering and probably people would notice. I think you could easily replace me panel by panel, but it's the right. If you replace the writers, I think people would notice. And so like that, that's what I liked about that, was that it gave recognition to them, and it also is like valuable for writing. Like writing about comics is like a terrible idea. Like it doesn't pay very well. It's like it's tough to get people to read it. It's so like that's I say, like my job was to try and fix some of those problems for the people that wrote for the magazine. I can't fix it any bigger than that, apart from your own little garden. And so it was like to give them something, to give people that wrote for that magazine something where they can say, like, you know, if they go get a writing job somewhere else or whatever, that they wrote for an award-winning publication, that's a good, useful thing to have. This is probably like my dad's voice in my head of like stuff for your CV, you know, like, but like give people something that had some prestige behind it that would help them with their next, whatever they were doing next after panel by panel.
So I guess I have to ask, considering that I think maybe it was a month or two ago that there was the news or announcement that the Eisners were no longer going to have a category for best comics related periodical or journalism, something to that extent. I apologize if I don't have all the details in front of me, but I think it was something to that extent, that they were kind of either downplaying or removing just in total that particular category. Like, what was your reaction or response to that? Because it almost feels like, you know, you mentioned that writing comics is a hard thing, right? Like it's hard to make any money off it, or, you know, get people to much less readership. Like, do you feel like that decision is kind of, you know, a death blow, or, and that might be a little too extreme, but, you know, like it almost feels like a really bad blow to comics journalism, you know, like, I guess what are your thoughts on that?
It's not good, because I mean it's one of those things where it's like, so what I think happened is that they shifted best comics related journalism / periodical, which is the thing that the award category that we won. They merged it with best comic, like book about comics, I think, best scholarly work or something. It's something like that.
That sounds familiar.
So they've kind of got rid of the journalism part, so it's kind of like best book or periodical about comics. I think it's something like that. Again, I'm just getting this wrong probably, but it's like it's in that vein, right? So, which is a shame, because it's one of the few award like industry award bodies where they recognize critical writing about the industry. It doesn't, you know, like the Oscars don't have a category for best film journalism, for example. So it was like a fun way of the industry kind of recognizing that this stuff is valuable. It's like its own art form. It's its own craft. And so to get rid of it feels like a kind of like
kind of big, like a big F you know?
I don't know that I would go that far. It's almost like righting a wrong in a sense, because no one else does it. So I can see why in their heads they would be like, well, we can just get rid of that because no one else does that. I understand that point of view. I think it's a shame, because I think what we should be doing as an industry is supporting each of these different facets of the industry, and we should be spending time talking about good writing about comics, because I think good writing about comics makes us better people that make comics. It's its own art form. It's not a devaluation of the work that anyone else is doing or anything like that. But what it is its own process of appreciating and understanding craft in different ways. I mean, that's a very simplified version of it, but it's not. It is both tied to the work and untied from the work. It's its own work as well. And I think people forget that or don't see it like that. That when you're writing comics criticism, it's not. And criticism is a weird word as well, because it's not criticism of the books. It's critical writing about work, which is not necessarily. It's not the same as like when we think of constructive criticism or whatever. It's its own art form. It's not criticism of the book, but it is criticism of the book, because that's the term. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's its own thing, right? It's and we shouldn't be saying, well, I don't have to deal with that, because, as I say, I am a better comic book letterer because of critical writing about comics. I'm a better fan of comics because I've read good work about written by comic critics. I think the industry is healthier when there are good spaces for people to write and learn and grow their craft. And I think that as a whole, that we should engage, like creators should engage more in critical writing about comics. It always breaks my heart a little bit when you see someone say like, "Oh, there's no good writing about comics anyway," because there is. It's like it's kind of like shouldn't necessarily, you can't, just because you don't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And there is incredible writing done by really, really good critics that I think that deserve your attention. And that was kind of what we wanted to do with Panel by Panel, was in a sense like, you know, Strip Panel Naked was used as a way to get people's eyes onto this other thing. And that allowed us to have more readers than we would necessarily have had if we were just a bunch of people making a magazine. And so that was kind of like my process of thinking, was if I can use some leverage of like the subscribers from YouTube or whatever to get their eyes onto and pay money to read this stuff, then I can pay these writers money to write this stuff.
That's a good strategy.
And we can do some, like it can do a little bit of good. But it's there is incredible writing about comics, right? That just happens. It happens. I think Popverse has been doing some really, really good stuff. Tiffany Babb, co-editor of Panel by Panel, has been doing works at Popverse. I think like Steve Morris's Shelf Dust is a very similar collection of brilliant writers that write really, really interesting stuff about comics. And so like those are two good places to start. Women Write About Comics, also Eisner Award winners. You can support them on Patreon. So there is no excuse to not know where good critical writing about comics lives. It's very easy to find. Just ask me, and I'll tell you where to go to find this stuff. It's not hard. If we stop seeing it as its own thing and see it as a healthy part of the industry. I was thinking of like cinema and stuff, like Here's the Cinema, where you had like these creators who were using the critical process to break down an understanding of film to reimagine what it could be. Like that's valuable stuff for the health of a medium, and to just kind of say we don't want to engage with it because we don't think it's very good or whatever, it just feels very short-sighted to me.
Well said, man. Great answer overall. Love hearing that. I want to pivot really quickly and talk about something that's maybe somewhat semi-related to this topic right here. But I mentioned in the intro that you made your debut as a comic book writer in October with the release of The Unlikely Story of Felix and Macabre. But in one, I think it was a press release, you mentioned, or you said this quote here: "With Felix and Macabre, Junie and I wanted to explore the idea of doing whatever it takes to become something great." And I guess I wanted to hear from you. What does it take to be great in comics? Like, what kind of work ethic do you need to have? What kind of sacrifices do people need to keep in mind when it comes to like working in the industry? Like, how do you be great in comics?
Well, I think I think this is maybe a non-answer, but I think the thing with that is like your goal. It depends what you define to be great, right? Is great just self-expression, artistic expression? In which case, you don't need to be part of an industry at all. You can do that by, there's comics the industry and there's comics a medium, and your value as a creator is not tied to the first one of those. It's not tied to the industry. It's tied to the medium. The process of you creating work is irrelevant to the comics industry. Like you can be. Like I think one of the greatest comic book writers of all time doesn't engage with the industry in any way, shape, or form. And so you can, as long as you're creating work that is the work that you want to create, that feels true to the stuff that you want to make, then that's what makes you great. It's like, who's a better this is a weird path to go down, but I was like, who's a better musical artist, right? Like Beethoven or Britney Spears. But it depends what you're trying to do with the work that you're making, right? So it is irrelevant to compare those two things. And I think like, as what's the phrase of like comparison being the thief of joy? It's like what you're trying to do is you chose comics. You want to make comics because you love the medium, you love the process of making them, and so that should be the thing that always drives you first and foremost. I said this to someone recently who's like asking about like, how do I get into comics? And I was like, into the medium. And I was like, the thing with that is like, there's as you, like, you know, there's the industry, there's a medium. So it's like, do you want to be drawing 20 pages a month for like the next like 20 years, or is actually what is the thing that drives you, that there's a story that you want to tell, and you want to tell that story and then see where it goes after that. And that's maybe not a great answer, you know, for career wise or whatever, but I think sometimes we get lost. We move away from the thing that drew us to it in the first place, which was the process. And like, that's a thing that you have to remind yourself when you're doing a thing that you enjoy doing as a job as well. It's like, remember why you're doing this, because there are easier ways to make money, and there are easier ways to make more money. And without also just damaging your body from being sat at the computer all day every day.
Wow.
So it's think about the process of the thing. Think about the thing that drives you in the first place, and I think that's how you'll make great art. That's the source of great art, I think.
Damn, well said. A very good answer to that. Hans, I got one more question for you, and I think it kind of perfectly encapsulates a lot of the things that we were talking about, especially the comic journalism thing. But if you had the Infinity Stones collected, and you were tasked to change one thing about the comic industry, whether that be on the creative side, the retail side, consumer side, whatever side, what would you change? Like, what is the most glaring thing in comic books that you would change for the better?
Is that what are the Infinity? There's like the Soul Stone.
Well, I mean, when
Is
you
there
get
a
all
Mind
the
Stone? I
yeah,
don't.
soul,
What do you?
mind, power.
They just let you
You got
change
me on
anything.
well,
I
now
don't
you
know
got me
how
on the
I don't
spot.
know about comics.
Well, I mean, with all the stones, you get the ability to do anything you want. You could change anything with the snap of a finger.
Oh, okay. So what would I don't know. Just more people to like read them, I guess. I mean, or read them as not see them as. I think that there's okay. So maybe two things to this. I think one is that this is anecdotal, I suppose, but I think there's often the idea. This comes back to what I was talking about like an hour ago about the Beano and Dandy. Is that sometimes people see comics as like a stepping stone to like proper books.
Mm-hmm.
Which you know, proper books are also quite good. I say proper, but I'm doing proper with like air quotes. But like, you know, novels are also fun. But I think people see them as like the thing you read when you're not ready to read like a big epic or whatever yet. That you'll just look at comics. But again, it's like it's reminding people that like it's its own art form, its own visual language, and its own unique way of telling stories. I think that if we can, however you explain that to people, so that they stop seeing comics as just this kind of literary stepping stone. And I think the other thing is that we should allow people to explore and enjoy the comics in the format that they like to enjoy them in. Like I think people always argue like you know, this is real comics, or like this is real comics, or like comics are dying because we don't make this thing anymore, we make more. But like I saw is it Heartstopper, that what was adapted into the Netflix show? Like there's like 1 million copies of Heartstopper in my local bookshop. It's ridiculous. Like people are like love that comic book, and it's like that has driven tons of people to read comics. In people that wouldn't also call themselves comic book readers. They're just like, oh, I like that book, and it's like if we can figure out a way to show them that there are other things in this medium that they will also enjoy if they enjoy Heartstopper or whatever. I think that would be really valuable. And like, you know, people that read like Raina Telgemeier's books and then move on to books, it's like there are stuff you would go to next. There is like a whole world of books. And if someone's like a manga reader, that isn't not comics. Do you know what I mean? There's no animosity if people find manga that they love, or like if they only read like YA stuff or whatever. Like, it's such a massive medium that we need to I think we should stop thinking about. I shouldn't say this because my work is in the direct market and I would like to keep doing it, but like that's not like where it begins and ends. Like, there are a multitude of stuff, and we can work in collaboration, and we can take things from each of these different approaches that will make our version of comics healthier. I don't think that's really the question you asked me, but that's
Exactly. You got to stop doubting these questions. They're really well thought out answers. And I think that's a great use of the Infinity Stones to, you know, improve comics. But I guess that made me think, or that made me want to ask, what's your white buffalo in terms of like work or projects? You know, like you just got to become a published comic book writer. You're doing the lettering, you know, you've got panel by panel and the strip panel naked on the back burners. Still, you know, you're still doing those just a little more, you know, less frequently. But I guess what what's on the horizon for you? Like, what do you want to do? What is still out there that you haven't accomplished yet in the world of comic books, or just I guess larger professional goals?
I really like if Luka Doncic was to do like a comic book. I'd really like to letter that. I think that would be really good fun.
For the audio only listeners right now, uh, Hassan completely surprised me when we got on camera. I knew that he was from the UK, but my man had a Cincinnati Bengals coffee cup. He was drinking out of a Cincinnati Bengals coffee mug, and he's got a rad. It almost looks a little retro, but he's got a Dallas Mavericks hoodie on as well. If that helps with the context or anything.
Yeah, so I'd like I've done a couple of cool one basketball thing that hasn't been announced, and I
Oh wow!
got to do the Colin Kaepernick graphic novel from the other year. That was really good fun. So any sport, I
Oh,
really
that's
like doing
cool.
like sports stuff. Like the sports stuff is quite good fun. But I don't think Luca's into comic books. But if Luca Doncic ever decided like, I'm going to make a comic book, just let me know. I
Give
suppose
him
that
hell
would be
yeah!
really good fun.
You know what, man? Damn, I swear, I think I've got a running theory. This is the second time it's been proven correct that hyper hyper fans of comics, especially ones that like revere it in like this very elevated way, also are diehard sports fans. And you've proven this. And when I interviewed David Harper and learning his love of the NBA, also proved it. So that kind of gives me a good chuckle right now.
Yeah, anything sports, but like I'm a big Texas Rangers baseball
Hmm.
fan as well. So like anything sports based is always, and there's not a lot of sports comics that that aren't
Yeah, that's
sort
a
of
good
like
point.
Japanese comics like manga stuff. So any sports comics, I'm always a big. That's always good fun to work on.
Is that how you unwind from all of just because I mean, like I said, I imagine you're constantly either thinking, talking, or working on something related to comic books. Like, how do you unwind from all of that? Like,
Yeah, I watch a
what do
lot
you
of
do to
sport.
disconnect? Hmm,
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, I watch a lot of NFL, NBA, and baseball. Like my three. I want to get into
Was that
hockey, but it
something?
just seems like a whole thing.
Oh, it's definitely a whole thing. So, was that something that you just like sports? Was sports always in the house? Was that something like your family put onto you, or you just found on your own?
Uh, I don't know. Yeah, yeah. I mean, we watched a lot of like Algerian national football
Hmm.
when I was a kid, from like a dodgy skybox. That won't mean anything to you, but from like a dodgy skybox that my dad had.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I don't
Is a
really like
Dodgy Skybox really quick? Is a Dodgy Skybox like bootleg cable?
Sky. Yeah, Sky is like a British version of kind of like, yeah, I guess it would be like cable. And my dad had
Hmm.
like a I don't know if it was like a hacked one or something that got like Arabic channels, but it was like he just had this like old Skybox that got Arabic channels for some reason when we were
Yeah.
kids.
All right. Well, in that case, I could definitely relate to that because we had hella bootleg cable. My mom is I'm Moroccan, so my mom's Moroccan, so she
Oh,
always
okay.
wanted Arabic channels. So my
Hmm.
dad and just family in general found certain ways to get those channels for her. So I could definitely relate to that. That's cool to hear, man. That's cool to hear. All right. Haz, I want to go ahead and end on that happy note. And I want to thank you for your time and just sharing your perspective. And hopefully the listeners learn something new, whether it be about the comic making process, lettering, or just in general. Or maybe hopefully they learn what a skybox is. Even if that's the only takeaway you got is what a skybox is. I hopefully the listeners enjoyed. I'm gonna have links to your socials, to your websites in the show notes. I'll have a link to people to check out the YouTube channel and panel by panel. But do you have anything that you want to personally share or plug or tell the listeners before we wrap up?
um, yeah, I think just tries panel by panel magazine. Like I'm really proud of that. So give that a go, and like I said, check out some of the like Shelf Dust, Women Write About Comics, um, and Pop First. Have a look at some good writing about comics as well. And yeah, I don't know. But
Good stuff. Well, look, hopefully the next time that we chat, it'll be to promote and talk about this Luca comic book that I didn't know I needed in my life until now. But Haas, it's been great, and I appreciate you a lot, man. Thank you.
thanks for having me. Yeah.
All right, let me go ahead and press stop right here. Make sure it just uploads correctly.